I'm Amy Ocampo, editor for Business Insight and Analysis at Devex. Joining me today are Jemima Juki, Senior Program Officer at Canada's International Development Research Center, Dr. Nikita Gopal, Principal Scientist at the ICAR Central Institute of Fisheries Technology, and Ranjitha Puskor, Senior Scientist at WorldFish. So we're here today to talk about the gender gap in science and development research. The UNESCO Institute for Statistics notes that only 30% of the world's researchers are women. The percentage is much lower when you look at the share of female researchers in the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. In South Korea, for instance, only 9% of female researchers work in engineering and technology. So my first question for all of you lovely women, one concern when certain fields are dominated by males is that the culture within those fields will likely be set and maintained by men. Is it the same case in international development research? Can you share what your experience was like? Maybe we can start with, who wants to start?
May I go, Amy?
Yes, please go ahead, Ranjitha.
Good morning, Amy. Thank you so much for taking time to talking to us this morning on this extremely important topic, much appreciated. Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting how there aren't too many women in research and sciences. And if we look at international agricultural research in particular, it's actually lower than 30%, only about 1 in 4 researchers, so approximately about 25% are women. And as you go up in leadership positions, only 1 out of 7 is a woman. So that's something to note. And the thing I think is not really just about closing that gap, but it is to understand why it is important to bring a wide variety of perspectives and benefits from both men and women to benefit research, development, and society. If you look at agricultural research, yeah, even after 5 decades of talk about mainstreaming or integrating gender in agricultural research, the gender gaps still persist. The same challenges still exist. Somehow don't seem to be getting a breakthrough. And if you look at what happens on the field, there is evidence to show that research doesn't reach the poorest rural women. And in many socio-cultural contexts, this is attributed to not having enough women researchers to understand the needs of these poor rural women. And women in the agricultural science are not always in a great position to influence what the research priorities are that would determine what science we do, development of solutions and technologies that would work positively for poor rural women. Thank you.
Just to add on to what Ranjita is saying, I think she is right in the sense that in agriculture research we are seeing the same kinds of statistics as in other engineering and technology subjects. But to reiterate the fact that this diversity, this gender diversity is very essential for research, because we do know that men and women bring different perspectives to the table. And when women aren't in these decision-making positions, if you have only 1 woman out of every 7 research leaders, what it actually means is we are missing a whole lot of agendas. We're missing a whole lot of skills and gifts and intelligence in decision-making. Just to give you an example, and especially for international research and development, if you're thinking about issues of increasing productivity, if you have men at the table A lot of the concerns are around how do we increase productivity? How do we get those varieties, those breeds that have the maximum output? The moment you put women at that table, the conversation shifts because they start thinking about what are the implications for nutrition? What are the implications for women's labor? Even in livestock sciences, where I've spent a lot of work, a lot of time in, it means you start thinking about the livestock that are important for women, that research doesn't only focus on large livestock, but it focuses on small ruminants, it focuses on poultry, livestock that's very important for women. So what it means is if we do not do something about really getting more women into science, getting more women into research and development, getting more women into leadership, we really are missing a whole plethora of needs and constraints that affect women. And this has a lot of implications. It means even for the sustainable development goals that we might not be able to achieve this if we do not use the available skills that we have. So I often say that getting women into research, getting women into leadership, it's not just a matter of their ambition. It's actually a matter for economic growth. It's a matter for development that everybody really has to take very seriously.
I think Ranjita and Jemima have hit the nail on the head. We have fewer women in leadership positions, and I think that's one of the reasons the reasons for which have to be looked into. When we see the scientific workforce in India itself, it's around estimated that it's around only 12% women are entering into the scientific workforce. Though there are a lot of the girl students coming into science education, the numbers are increasing. But when it comes to the scientific workforce, I think there are so many factors, cultural factors that are actually, maybe preventing women to get into the workforce. And also, I come from the fishery sector. I work in the fishery sector, and we see that women here we are around 25% in the scientific workforce. But as we go higher and higher, there are lesser women in leadership positions and in positions which can influence policy and guide the research. So I think that is what both of you have been also mentioning, that we bring in our a female perspective to whatever we do, and that actually adds up and can improve the work that we're doing and the results that can be brought about. And that is where I think more focus has to be given, and reasons have to be sought as to why women are not able to reach those leadership positions. It's not, I think, a case only with India. I think all over the world, if you see, it's the same situation. We have fewer women in the leadership positions, while women are there, if you see at the lower levels of the scientific organizations. So women are there and women are doing. Only thing is, most women feel that they have to put in double the effort to prove that they are doing as much as the men can, and that has been, I think, across. It's not just science and technology; it's across sectors that women have this feeling that they have to work double and to prove themselves. So I think that's about, yes, cultural factors, yes, they do affect, and yeah.
So
maybe if I could just build on what Nikita was saying about the fish and the women scientific workforce in fish. This week I'm in Nairobi attending a workshop launching a major program on intra-regional fish trade in sub-Saharan Africa. And once you start talking about regional or intra-regional fish trade, immediately the focus is on high-value fish species and high-value markets. While when you look at, women play a pretty significant role in several parts of the fish value chains. They are small informal traders, and they mainly focus on low-value, small pelagic kind of fish. And but they play. I mean, 70% of the processing in fish is handled by women. 70 to 80% of the trade in fish is handled by women. But if you don't have women scientists sitting at the table when such research programs are being designed and developed, that doesn't come to the fore, you know? And there isn't much analysis on understanding how policies or trade policies impact on these poor women. Nobody pays attention to collecting sex disaggregated data, and because you don't have sex disaggregated data, we don't have evidence to influence policies. So that all seems like a pretty vicious circle there.
It's interesting what you said about, nobody being interested in collecting sex disaggregated data. Why do you think that is?
I think we must admit that a lot has changed in agriculture research, because the last 10 years we've seen a lot of momentum and a lot of focus on integrating gender in agriculture research. But I must say that we still have a long way to go. One of the things, one of the constraints around collecting sex disaggregated data, and this is where we also have to separate some myths from fact, is that it is expensive. Yeah, that it means you have to collect data from men and women, that you have to spend more time understanding what their needs and constraints are. But in the long run, the impact or the results of research that come out of understanding what those different constraints and needs are actually surpass the cost of collecting that data, because you really get a good understanding of, if you think about the fact that farmers are men and women, that fisher folk are men and women and youth, and treat that as a basic fundamental. Yeah, and that these groups of people have different needs and they have different priorities, and that they will be impacted by technologies, by research, by development interventions in different ways. You then start seeing the value of actually understanding, what do these different types of groups need? What kind of research should we be doing to address their needs? And the benefits of that are, I don't know, if integrating gender in research, it has been shown. I think right now we know the evidence is clear that you get better development outcomes, yeah, that you get increased productivity, and those benefits far surpass the costs of actually taking time to understand and to collect gender disaggregated data, sex disaggregated data that would define what kind of research, how you prioritize research efforts. And sometimes it also takes a lot of commitment from people. I would say that in IDRC right now, it is actually a requirement for all our grants that they integrate gender in research, that they collect that sex disaggregated data that shows how their interventions are benefiting men and women, how they're benefiting young people, to show that they are actually addressing the needs of men and women, smallholder farmers, fisher folk, entrepreneurs, and consumers. So it also does take organizational commitment and political will to actually make it happen.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Jemima saying that we need to collect sex disaggregated data because it can better influence the way research is conducted and the way policies are implemented and the way development programs are developed. I think basically there's a lack of clear-cut policy on that, every project that we take up has to have a gender dimension, and we have to have baseline data on gender lines. So that I think slowly it is coming in, mainly because donor agencies are now requiring that we do that. We look at projects, we look at initiatives and from the gender angle, and slowly those things are, as you mentioned, things are coming in. But the pace is slow, and maybe the expenditure, the expenses involved is one of the factors. But then gains will be in the long term much more bigger than the initial expenses that we are going to be having. And also, I think there's a need for sensitization, especially at the level of the school or the college level. We don't look at things in that way. It's all even technology development sometimes tends to be gender blind. You know, we don't look at the impacts it can have on men and women, and technology development process itself is often gender blind, and that sensitization has to come right from the school or college level when we teach children that we have to look at gender dimension when we in doing things. I think that will automatically reflect when we want employment or implementing activity. So, and that will automatically reflect in the projects that they're doing also when they come into the science workforce. So I think gender sensitization is also required at that level. At the moment, not there. I think in our curriculum and in our education system.
So you've all talked a little bit about the advantages of integrating gender into research in agricultural and fisheries research. Um, and you've also talked a little bit about how gender-focused research could really help create more inclusive development interventions. But are there other ways that gender-focused research can help design more targeted, more inclusive development interventions?
Well, I think I'll reiterate what Jemima was saying. I mean, there is this perception bias that men are the farmers, men are the fishers, while the truth is that at least 50% of those farmers are women, and most of them are poor. Yeah, women might not go out fishing in a lot of cases, but they play a very important role in processing and trade, etc. The challenges that men and women face are very different. Women own small pieces of land, they have fewer assets, their access to knowledge and services limited. On top of that, they are constrained by several social and cultural factors, and therefore different interventions and technologies have different influences and impact on them. And that these biases kind of affect the research outcomes and impacts. So if we try and understand these differences and tailor solutions that can meet these different needs of poor men and women, that's when our solutions will be effective and give us greater impact.
I would like to build on what Ranjita is saying by giving you an example of some work that we have in India and Nepal. And this work really started by, especially in Nepal, understanding the farming system and the different roles that men and women play in the farming system. And understanding some of the gender dynamics, even at household level. There's a lot of male migration into urban areas in Nepal. Women are being left to farm. And yet a lot of research hasn't focused on how do we then support these women to farm in an efficient way, in a way that generates them income, in a way that reduces their drudgery. So initial assessments of this farming system came out with the analysis showed that mechanization or developing mechanization tools that would support farming in these hillsides would go a long way in terms of increasing productivity, production, and getting more diversity of foods onto the household table. But it also looked at the whole process, from planting to weeding to harvesting. And we now have a project that has revolutionized the way maize and millets are grown in India and Nepal, introducing tillers and planters, but also dehurlers, because we know women are spending a lot of time doing the post-harvest, just like in the fisheries sector, doing the processing and the post-harvest activities. And a lot of times these activities are overlooked and people focus on the actual production of the crop, mainly because it's women, women spending, it's they're called women-focused activities. Now, just by doing that research, then the private sector comes in and other development partners, because research can only do so much, because research helps to understand and develop appropriate interventions. But taking those to scale will actually require private sector engagement, and getting the private sector to understand these issues is also crucial. So we now have private, in the second phase of this project, very strong involvement of the private sector to make sure that these technologies can be taken to scale. So a research project leading to really a massive effort in terms of taking technology to scale, and technology that reduces women's drudgery. Just having this whole value chain perspective has actually reduced the amount of time that women spend on millet production by up to 85%. So you can imagine how much time women then have to do, to balance their care work, to have leisure time, because sometimes people forget that women do also need leisure time to engage in other productive activities. And there has to be that very strong connection between research, development, and private sector partners, and everyone must have this lens, this gender lens, in terms of how they do both research and development.
And for the gender lens to be there, there should be gender sensitivity right from the beginning. That is where the point I was mentioning earlier also. Because when we see the marine fishery sector and when the mechanization came in the marine fishery sector, we found that the women have been totally, left out of the sector, because earlier the boats were landing on the land and on the beaches. Women were able to collect the fish and then do the post-harvest activities and marketing. Now with the bigger boats, with the mechanization coming in, the boats are able to land only in the harbors, and women find it difficult to travel from the villages and go to the harbors and engage in the activities that they have been engaged in. Slowly they're being marginalized and excluded from that sector where they were contributing quite a lot earlier. So it's a question of finding alternative employment for them. I think those questions, if they had initially asked when the whole process of technology development is taking place, maybe I think that's that thing we're seeing that across many sectors. In fact, in a recent study in the four lower Mekong countries, that is Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, which was focused on the small-scale aquaculture sector, women were not even recognized as being part of the small-scale aquaculture, though they were contributing a lot in terms of the activities that are taking place in the farm, because it was mostly in the form of unpaid family labor, and it was not considered to be actually contributing to the aquaculture production in the farm. So there is a sort of an exclusion, an invisibility as far as women are concerned in the sector. So I think more projects or more programs that can see the differences, that can also address their concerns, are required. And I think slowly things are changing, but it is, as I said earlier also, the pace is extremely slow. And I think as women, we can do much more if there are more women coming into the research and development process, because we can bring in our acumen into it. We can bring in our, I think, a feminine touch to the whole process of research and development.
I think Jemima brought an interesting point about, research is not enough. The private sector needs to be involved to make sure there really is more inclusive gender interventions. And Nikita also brought an important point about providing employment to women in the fisheries and also in the agricultural sector. So how can the development community, the donor community, encourage private sector involvement in increasing women's participation in agriculture and fisheries?
I think it's very similar to research. One of the things about the private sector is, for them, women are a market, and getting that understanding that actually half of their global market. If you're selling technology, if you're selling improved varieties, improved seed, fertilizers, having that understanding that half of your clients are going to be women, yeah, and those women have different needs and priorities than the men. And building that capacity in the private sector, and this is where the role of research comes in, because we've been thinking about this for much longer. Yeah, building that capacity in the private sector to actually have an understanding of what are women's needs as clients, as consumers, as farmers, as entrepreneurs. And the sex disaggregated data also comes in very handy here, because if there is a good understanding of this is what our global market looks like, these are the statistics around men and women, these are the statistics of what is their current use of technologies, and these are the strategies that have been proven to work to reach women smallholder farmers. And nowadays, technology has advanced so much. If you think about the use of mobile phones to reach even harder to reach populations, including women in rural areas. So taking advantage of some of those technological advances to actually get the private sector to reach women farmers and entrepreneurs and consumers.
So I guess my final question now is, I mean, you all didn't get to where you are now without being encouraged in some form to pursue a career, your studies in research. So how do you think can donors and education advocates encourage girls and young women to pursue their studies and a career in science and research? And going beyond that, what steps then can be taken to ensure that women can get better representation in research and science?
Amy, let me take a crack at that. Nikita, when she started off, actually mentioned a number of factors. You actually do see women or girls and young women getting into science, into education, but as they move into their careers, they seem to drop out, or they're not progressing as much as they could. It is an issue that not enough, well, things are changing without a doubt, but fewer women and girls, pursued science. There are these very entrenched biases and stereotypes that girls are not smart enough to pursue sciences and engineering and stuff. Okay, once they have crossed that hurdle, and then when they get into their careers, I mean, they have to reconcile what their career ambitions are with the care responsibilities, with the family responsibilities. And a lot of them drop out at that stage or are held back for various reasons. So it isn't exactly a level playing field that we get. And on top of that, there's not very friendly structures and dynamics at the workplace. And even today, we still say, that women can't have it all. So they have to contend with a lot of these things. And, well, for me personally, I gained, immensely from having very supportive leaders, or bosses, let's call them, yeah, men and women, being my coach and mentor and championing, for women's leadership and development. What helped me was being in the right kinds of alliances and networks within the workplace and outside of the workplace to help move forward. And then there are some incentives, some policies that are very important. I mean, things like flexible working hours. I think we tend to underestimate how important that is. I mean, that played a significant role in having to balance both a career and, parenting responsibilities. And I think all of us have a responsibility to to become role models and coaches and mentors for young women and girls, and help them to see how agricultural research and development is an inspiring career choice, and how that can contribute to development and reducing the poverty and hunger that's plaguing us.
I think
I would like to add on what Ranjita is saying, because this is very, very critical. Because when we talk about women's empowerment and leadership, it really is going to require change at many levels, because this is society changing how they view they view women. It's organizations putting a level playing field for women to advance. It's organizations having policies that actually encourage women to be in science and to remain in science. So I can think about four things that we can do. I think first of all, we need to the international research and development community needs to realize that this is not just an issue of women. I mean, in the corporate sector, it's been shown that if you have women in decision making, in boards and in high professional levels, you actually have higher returns on investment, higher productivity. This is not just about the women. It's about it's a much bigger picture. In terms of mentoring, I think it's very, very critical that even those of us that are in this conversation become mentors, and others like us become mentors to younger girls and younger scientists who are striving to make it in science and research. And I can think of two programs. One program, I'm sure you've heard of, the African Women in Agriculture Research and Development Award, that basically takes young scientists early on in their career and gives them 2 years of mentoring. They have a network of mentors, and gives them professional skills and leadership skills that they require to actually make it in their careers. Now, some of these need to be scaled up because they receive a lot of applications, but they can only manage about 25% of the applications they receive. So the need for mentoring is there, and this needs to be scaled up. In the IDRC new strategic plan, we've actually put a lot of emphasis on leadership, and we have a fellowship program that's going to focus on science, technology, and mathematics, and a very huge focus of that on inclusion and women, both for graduate fellowships and for research fellowships, so that women can start getting into the international space, into the research space, and actually staying there. So giving them the support that they actually need to stay there. The third thing is around policies. For a long time, we've had policies around 30-70 representation. This is not enough. Having 30% of women in populations of 50% women means that we are missing something. So all these policies around 30-70 need to go. If organizations have 30-70 representation at different levels, they know they're doing something wrong, and they need to have policies that actually get them to 50-50. And lastly, we've been talking a lot, the issue of women in leadership, women in science and technology, girls in science and technology. And I think as the research and development community, we need to start putting money and investment and political will behind those words. We cannot continue talking and not doing enough. And this being Beijing +20, this being the Africa Union Year of Women's Empowerment, we are hoping to see much more political commitment and investments into women in science and women in leadership.
I would just like to mention one program that is there in India that is funded by the Department of Science and Technology, where women who have dropped out of their careers because of family and native responsibilities can come back and work independently, as long as they can find an institute to host them, and they're funded and they can work independently. So that is one of the sort of program that I was just mentioning, the award program. It's not exactly a parallel, but a program where women can actually pick up from where they have left. Also, there are leaks in the primary and secondary education. We find that girls drop out at certain stages of their primary and secondary education. We need to plug those leaks so that girls can continue their education and get advanced further. And as Ranjita mentioned, yes, institutional and policy requirements are there, and they are supportive to a large extent. But again, I think there are some uh, stereotypes also, gender biases do continue to be there. But I think generally institutions are and policies are there which sort of support men to continue their careers. Those things have to be taken advantage of. I think it's up to us to also take advantage of those arrangements that we get. And yes, mentoring the future generation and the girls and women working along with us. That is the most important factor, because there is always there's always a point made that sometimes women in business can also become very patriarchal in their outlook, which I think we should not develop, because sometimes women that we reach there and the other women also should do it on their own. No, that does not always happen, because their social and cultural milieu may be different, their capabilities and challenges may be different. So it's up to the women who reach a particular position in their careers to support and mentor the other women to develop and to reach their full potential. And that is one aspect where we all can probably contribute.
So thank you everyone for joining this Google Hangout and for this very insightful discussion.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, just before we switch off again, just building on what Jemima said, we've talked enough about this stuff. This year's theme is International Women's Day's theme is Make It Happen. Let's make it happen. Let's all join hands and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you
all.
Thank you. And indeed, we should make it happen. So for more of our coverage on the role of women in development, stay tuned to Devex.com.